Okay, welcome to this class. So we already had looked at Wordsworth's preface to the Lyrical Ballads, and now you already know the salient features, the important concepts that are discussed by Wordsworth in that preface. Now we will go more into details of the essay. Something about the history of the publication of the Lyrical Ballads. It was first published in 1798, then 1800, then 1802, and finally 1850. 1850 is the last official edition of the Lyrical Ballads. In the first edition, that is published in 1798, there was no preface. Both Wordsworth and Coleridge contributed to that volume. Of course, Coleridge's contribution was very little, only 4 poems. In 1800, the second edition was published, and it is in the second edition that the preface appears. And in the third edition, in addition to the preface, Wordsworth also wrote an appendix on poetic diction. And the final edition, he revised both the preface and the appendix. So that is that much about the history of the publication of Lyrical Ballads. Now, when we come to the preface, at the beginning of the preface, Wordsworth tells us about the reason for writing such a preface, the context. He says the poems, by writing these poems, he wanted to test to what extent the reader will get pleasure by reading a poetry that used, in quotes, the real language of men in vivid sensation. These are the very words of Wordsworth. The real language of men in vivid sensation. So he was testing, experimenting with the poems. He wanted to know whether the reader will get pleasure by reading poems that are written in the real language of men in vivid sensation. And by the real language of men, Wordsworth meant the language that is used by people in their day-to-day life, especially the rural people, the villages. And in vivid sensation, sensation here means feeling or emotions. Vivid means clear. The emotions that the characters or the personas of the poems experience are very vivid, very clearly pictured in the poem. So he was testing whether readers will get some pleasure by reading this kind of poetry rather than the neoclassical poetry. Now, what was the outcome of the experiment? The outcome of the experiment was a big success. How did he know that it was a big success? Because a great number of people liked the poems. This was contrary to his expectation. He never expected that people would like his poems. He expected a lot of criticism. But surprisingly, most of the readers, many of the readers liked these poems, with only a very few disapproving of the poems. So the Lyrical Ballads was a big success. Now with the big success of these poems, several of his friends suggested that he must write a kind of a defense of the new theory of poetry. The Wordsworth was wrote those poems basing on a new theory of poetry. Now his friends were urging him to explain the new theory of poetry that was behind these new poems. But he was at first not ready to write this discussion or this analysis because for two reasons. Reason number one was he thought if he wrote an explanation or the defense of the new theory of poetry, then there is a likelihood of readers misunderstanding his purpose. Readers may think that Wordsworth, by explaining this theory, is trying to manipulate them, and he didn't want to be misunderstood. That was reason number one. Reason number two was to explain the new theory of poetry would require a large volume, a lot of pages. It cannot be written in a preface. Prefaces are usually very short. So, in that short space, he cannot explain all the new theory of poetry. So, for these two reasons, he was at first unwilling to submit to the request of his friends and readers. Finally, he decided to write not a defense of poetry, but a short preface. A short preface he wanted to write, because the poems in the collection are different from those the readers are used to read. So when you give something that the readers not expect, it is your duty to explain why you have written poetry like this. Because poetry, according to Wordsworth, is a contract between the poet and the readers. The readers expect certain things, and the poet fulfills their expectation. So thereby it can be considered as a contract. So the poet enters into a contract with the reader to fulfill his expectations, and these expectations of the reader are not the same in all ages. Okay, agreed. But what are the reader's expectations? Are they the same throughout the ages? For example, from the Elizabethan age to the modern age, did the readers expect the same things in poems and novels, for example? No. As ages change, readers also change. Their taste also changes. So, each generation of readers, or the readers that lived during each particular period of literature, had different expectations. The expectations of the readers during the neoclassical period was not the same as that during the Elizabethan period. So, the expectation of the readers during the Romantic age cannot be the same as that during the Victorian age, the neoclassical age. And the expectation of readers during the Victorian age cannot be the same as that during the Romantic age, or for that matter, the expectation of the readers of the modernist period or the postmodernist period. So for each period, the readers have different tastes, and the poets have to have to respect these tastes of the readers, and they have to write accordingly. It is their duty to write accordingly. So a reader who approaches his poems expecting to find what he has been used to find may get disappointed. For example, a reader who used to read a lot of neoclassical poetry expects, if such a reader is expecting to find the same experience in Wordsworth's poems, then he will be disappointed. And may even think that this is not poetry. He may even challenge, is this poetry? So this is what he may say. Now by this preface, he wants to warn the reader that his poetry is different from the neoclassical poetry, and wishes to state that why he has written poetry like this. What is the reason, the rationale for writing this kind of poetry. So this is the first part of the essay, and we have looked at it in a very detailed manner. So we will come to the next topic in the next class. Thank you.